You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome in the Psych with Mike Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan, and I am here with Mr. Brett Newcomb.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good.
So it is springtime in St. Louis. Do you have allergies?
No.
God, you lucky duck.
I live a clean life.
I don't think that has anything to do with it. But maybe it does. Maybe.
I don't know, take a shower once in a while, see if that helps. Get the pollen off.
I guess I could try it.
Shake your head.
I'll tell you what, man, when the dogwoods bloom in St. Louis, I know it's going to be a miserable 90 days.
It's time to go skiing.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah, if you'd be gone for a couple of weeks like that,
that would be very helpful. Yeah. Go up to the mountains. I am never more or less stuffy than when I'm at 14,000 feet. I have no allergies when we're in the mountains.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's, I don't know what so obviously whatever I'm allergic to is here at the lower elevations.
Down at the low level of life where you live.
Yeah.
Is that alliterative?
I would say yes.
Living at the low level of life lends luster.
The problem is that I give myself a bunch of horrible, negative shame messages associated.
Guilt, exactly.
Yeah. And then that's not helpful.
Well, just forgive yourself for that.
How do I do that?
If I knew the answer to that, I would be a wealthy man. Or if I could sell an answer to that.
Right. If you could bottle it.
The answer,
right.
If I could articulate one and sell it.
Yeah, like the old snake oil salesman selling cures off the back of a horse-drawn carriage.
Yeah, John Carradine, the Rain Man.
Yeah. So.
Or was that Burt Lancaster?
I
think it was Burt Lancaster.
Yeah. Oh, from
the movie Rain.
Yeah.
Not Rain Man with Dustin
Hoffman.
with
Dustin Hoffman. Yeah,
Rainmaker, maybe that's it.
Yeah. I think that was Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
God, we're old. So, in the course of my professional career, I'm not going to even bring my private life into it.
That's good.
I would argue that self-forgiveness is the number one issue that we deal with in therapy, even when the client doesn't know it.
Say more.
So I'm going to go on a tangent.
Not unusual at all.
Right. Well, because it's connected to grief. So I believe people talk about closure, but no one defines what closure is. And closure is nothing but acceptance. Once you accept a thing, you don't need closure. And until you accept a thing, you don't have closure. So closure is acceptance. If something happens, if, I lose a beloved pet and I'm really struggling with that, and everywhere I look in my house, I see that pet, it's because I haven't accepted the fact that the animal is gone, and so I don't have closure. And then once I accept that, then, I can move forward. And so in a similar way, I think that self-forgiveness is what keeps us rooted in pathological behavior and unable to move forward. Until we acquire self-forgiveness, we can't move forward. And as long as we don't have it, we stay stuck.
So how do we get it?
Well, as you said, if there were a way to do that, if we knew the answer to that, then we would be very, very wealthy individuals. part of the answer, I really liked this article that's associated with today's show because it actually did have a plan.
6 easy steps.
Yeah, well, and 4 R's, which I think are really, really helpful. Now, just because we can identify what is it called, alliteration. If just because we can, find 4 words that start with R and we say these are the keys to finding.
That's just helping to remember them.
Right.
Make it catchy.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that everybody can do that.
No, and you can't do formula therapy. I can't give you a sheet of paper with 4 R's on it. We're going to work on that list week after week after week until you get there. But it is a way to say, we talked about this before. Most recently, we were talking about deep clinical depression and the efforts that you go through to try to get your client to feel empowered in some way over their depression, over their destiny. Even if it's as minuscule as saying, I washed my hair twice this week, whatever it might be. I trimmed my toenails. Which the rest of the world might go, what? That's crazy.
Oh, I've had clients say that to me.
You're paying that guy to tell you to trim your toenails? But if you can feel empowered, if you can feel that you have the energy to make the decision and carry out the act that puts a chip on the table that wasn't there yesterday, then if you get enough chips on the table, you're not going to be depressed anymore. So I would say the same thing about forgiveness. You have to find a way forward. And so these are strategies suggested in this article that have been successful with any number of people in terms of just overcoming inertia. It's easier, once you overcome inertia, it's easier to change directions. You can steer, but if you haven't overcome inertia, you can't go anywhere.
Right. So let's just put the 4 R's out there, and then we'll talk about them.
What are they? I don't have them.
Responsibility, remorse, restoration, and renewal.
All right.
And so for me, the reason that I really, or one of the reasons that I like this article is because I agree with this formula. As you said, we can't do formulaic therapy, but I do agree that if we can move a client forward, or if the individual can move themselves forward through this progression, I think that this makes a lot of sense to me, that person would have some alleviation of that sense of guilt and shame. But I think responsibility is the center, and I think that is just so hard.
Does that come out of your affiliation with 12-step programs, or is that just independently a value that you see?
I don't know if I can.
Are you indoctrinated to that perspective?
Right. No, I hear the question, and I'm not offended by it. I don't know that I can separate it.
Yeah.
Because that's been my experience. It doesn't feel to me like that.
It's a tool. A screwdriver's a screwdriver.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if it's a useful tool,
right, and
we see that as a foundational tool for every homeowner, you need to have a screwdriver. Okay, let's get one. And that's not the end of the world. That's just the beginning of the acquisitions of the tools that you need.
But I say that I don't think that it is necessarily from. I may be more in tune with it from my 12-step history, but I think that I've seen it in people who aren't dealing with addictions. I just don't think that our society is very good or encourages us to take personal responsibility. I think our society is very want to blame external factors. I think our society trains us. If you have a headache, then you shouldn't drink water and try and meditate. You should take a pill, because that's not your fault.
It's an easier way forward.
Right.
Yeah.
And so
I don't know it's about fault. Maybe it's about efficacy and efficiency.
See, I see it about fault, and that may be where my 12-step training comes in, is because of.
So I think fault and shame are part of a script that was written by other people to control your choices.
Yeah.
To keep you in line when they're not there to supervise you.
Yeah.
So if your parents shame you and give you shame-based messages whenever you misbehave.
But let's talk about what's the difference between shame and guilt then, just so that we are identifying the terms.
All right. And then I think you have to also factor in, is it externalized in its application
Yeah.
to you, or
Yeah.
is it internalized?
Yeah.
So if my mother says, you are guilty of doing this, I mean, even if I did do it, the guilt message comes externally and oppresses me. The guilt message could come internally and oppress me as well.
But if the guilt message is inside of you and then you say, now I'm a bad person,
Right.
I think now it's shame.
If you internalize it, so
Yeah.
then you get to shame.
Yeah.
And I'm less than, and I deserve less than, and I cause pain and despair wherever I go. Woe is me. Why would anybody? I should not. Why would anybody be with me? But I shouldn't be with people because I bring damage with me.
Right.
And so people I care about are going to get hurt if they affiliate with me.
And so responsibility, the reason why I think it is so challenging to get initially at the core of responsibility is because we have to accept responsibility not just for the guilt messages. It's easy for me to say to you, hey, your mom told you that. That's not your internal script, and you can choose to say, I don't want to
So-
live that way anymore. But you also have to take responsibility for the shame, and that's harder to do.
I believe words matter. The words we hear in our head, the words we say to each other. And I try to make a distinction between saying responsibility and responsibility. Now break that into two words instead of one. Responsibility is an implied burden. It's yours to carry. Responsibility suggests that I have the option to choose something different. I have the ability to respond this way or that way. And so if it's my responsibility to show up for work on time, and I take ownership of that, I can come in because I'm late regularly. The boss calls me and say, hey man, you're not coming to work often enough, well enough. We're going to have to let you go. And I can come back and say, the drive down here is so difficult, and there's been a flood, and there was a wreck, there was a 10-car pileup, and it was on the news, it's not my fault. Maybe one time, maybe two times. But if that's a consistent pattern in my behavior, then I have to take responsibility to look at it and say, all right, is this a value that I need to address? Is this a behavior that I want to change?
Right. And
Or
so,
I can just be the victim script. So many people come to therapy because they're living out victim scripts, and you have to help them discover that and choose to change it.
and because we're old, so when I was in school,
Yeah.
It's now called self-efficacy, but we used to call it locus of control. Do you
Yeah.
see the locus of,
Yeah.
bad things happening in your life emerging from inside of you, and you have an ability to change it, or are they externally enforced and you have no control over
That's
them?
my brother.
Yeah.
We share a room and everything goes wrong. He did. And I get punished. My life suffers. I get canceled out from privileges because he screwed up. I hate him.
But then if we are always looking for what is the external reason for why things are happening to me, then I have that external locus of control. And that leads to the victim script.
Right.
And so then to accept responsibility, I have to be able to break out of that. And I think that's just so hard for people to do. And when you have them in therapy and we want to gently say, but you kind of want to shake them and say, hey, look, this is a worldview that you have that's keeping you trapped.
Yeah.
And can you give yourself permission to be able to see that, because that's what's going to give you the power and the control to change it.
Well, I can remember talking to adolescents for years and years and years who would come in and say, I want to go to college, but my dad says if I'm going to go to college, I have to major in accounting and join the family accounting firm. And I don't want to do accounting. I want to be an opera singer. But he won't pay for that. So I can't go. Woe is me. I can't go to school. Woe is me. And I would say, yes, you can. You can go. You don't have to go on your dad's money. You don't have to graduate in 4 years. If that's a value that you have, get up off your butt and go get it. Work it out. Do it. You can't be a victim here. This is a choice you're making. I'm not going to pursue this. I had one client, Took him 8 years to graduate from the University of Missouri. He majored in every major they offered. Every time he got to the end of the line, he'd sign up for a new major and get new courses he would need to take. He graduated with like 600 hours of college credit at the undergraduate
and 4
level.
degrees and
Well, just one degree.
Well, he just had one degree, huh?
But yeah.
Yeah.
He liked to march in the marching band for the football field. And he kept finding ways to do it and didn't have to get on with his life. But he was paying the way.
Yeah.
His family would.
Yeah.
So he made lifestyle choices. He lived in a crummy college apartment.
Right.
To be able to pursue what he wanted to pursue.
Right. And
So that was his, quote, fault.
And well, but I wouldn't even say. I would say he just made a choice to live his life the way he wanted
Yes.
to. And that's perfectly fine. Now,
Yes.
you may reach a point where you're 28 years old and now you've graduated and you have to go out
Now
and
what?
actually
Yeah.
and figure out now what.
Yeah.
But I don't think that you then look back on the 8 years you spent at Mizzou and say, "Oh my gosh, that was wasted time." No, you chose to live your life the way you wanted to, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
You may have to figure out what happens next, but that's okay. It was okay for you to spend your life living that way if that was intrinsically egocentric, means that it's congruent with who you are internally.
Right.
If that was egocentric for you, then there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, let's take our break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the other 3 on the list.
All right. Well, one of the reasons that I want to participate in this show is because it gives me an opportunity to clinically review my understanding of what therapy is and how it works, especially for the consumer. So my hope is that we will find conversations that broaden my understanding of that.
And my hope is that we do that in a way that is useful but also entertaining for people, so that they want to listen, not only because they're getting good psychology information, but because they just enjoy the show.
Easy listening with an informational twist. So
That's a
they're
new
not-
tagline.
They're not sitting there going, huh?
Easy listening with an informational twist.
I'm really good at this. I'm a professional.
You're a professional. If it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike. Okay, we're back, and so we could talk the whole time about responsibility, because I think that is that big of a deal. But let's say that we've worked with the client and they are at a place where they're ready to take responsibility. Then how do we move forward? The person is ready to see what they need to see to accept genuine responsibility, and then what? Because just because I acknowledge responsibility for the way
Yeah, it
things
doesn't
are,
change anything.
doesn't mean that anything's changed now.
So then we say, what do you have in the tool bag? What might help you have a different perspective, a different window to look out of?
Well, the second thing on the list is remorse, and so what I'm trying to get
you want me
out
to
of
go in
you,
order, okay.
no. But what I'm trying to get at, what I want to know from you is, do you believe that is necessary? So if I feel bad, if I'm, always
Well, it's like saying
shitting
you
on
have
myself.
gas in a car. Remorse is an energizer, and it can give you the energy, if it's used in a healthy way, to move in a different direction.
Right.
Just like if you put gas in your car, then or charge your battery, your electric car will go. So I look at remorse as a sense of energy that can be applied specifically,
But
directionally.
if I use your analogy,
Yeah.
if I fill my tank up with water and I say, well, the tank's full,
Yeah.
what's the problem? How come I can't go? So remorse, I think, can be an energizer, but it can also be something that we use.
I would say, you didn't use water, buddy. You use crap. You're full of crap. So no, yeah, it can be. But again, there's an opportunity cost and responsibility again. You can choose to do this in a way that reinforces your sense of powerlessness, stuckness.
Exactly.
Or you can choose to use it in a way that says, well, maybe. So then I would say, so now what? Living the way that you're living, do you feel lonely?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and that's exactly right. So, your guy spent 8 years at Mizzou.
Surrounded by people that were doing things he enjoyed.
And it was probably great, but then at the end of that time, that wasn't working for him anymore.
But at the end of that time, most people he started with had gotten on with
Yeah.
their lives and gotten married and had kids
Right.
and had houses, and he was looking at them like, they've outgrown
Right.
me.
And so he
I'm
may
still
have
here.
experienced some remorse, and he could have
Maybe,
used
yeah.
that to keep him locked and say, "Oh, I'm never going to
Yeah, I
amount
can't
to
catch up
anything."
now.
Or he could use that to propel him into that next phase of life.
Or he could dive into a younger and younger and younger group and let each layer move
Yeah,
beyond him
yeah.
and stay stuck.
I hadn't thought of that as an option, but I guess you could do that.
I know a number of people have done that.
But then if you do that, then I don't know if you ever feel remorse.
Yeah, hopefully
Yeah,
not.
right,
Because
right.
then you feel despair,
Yeah.
failure,
Yeah.
powerlessness.
So remorse is not something that we're not going to say to a client, "Oh, well, you should feel horrible about yourself." I mean, that's not going to be something that we're going to do. But when the client expresses remorse, we're going to try and help them to be able to use that as an energizing factor
How are you
and
gonna
not a
use it?
limiting factor.
Yeah. Like Albert Ellis.
Yeah.
You know, you should go through the thought process.
Mm-hmm.
I people hold on to desperately, unconsciously and consciously, those scripts that keep them trapped.
Mm-hmm.
Partly because they're afraid of giving themselves permission to be whatever it is they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because if they become whatever they want to become, they may not fit in the package that they've lived in before. Those people might change, those locations might change, those requirements might change. And change is frightening.
Mm-hmm.
So better to just endure what we can endure. Teach me how to suffer through this.
Right.
Don't encourage me to change it, because it's a whole
Right.
new world.
And so what I say to clients all the time is that the pain of the known
Yeah.
is always preferred to the fear of the unknown.
Yes.
And so you
Yeah.
know what your pain is. You know how to exist within that pain. And even though you may acknowledge this is horrible, this is terrible.
I wanted to be a sailor. I could have been a sailor, but God, I was born in Omaha. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there's no way you could move to a place where they had water.
What?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So remorse is an energizing factor. The next two are things that I really want to get to with you, because I'm very, very interested in hearing your take. Because so the next two are restoration and renewal, which are terms that I don't know are as well defined. So what does that even mean, restoration or renewal?
Well, restoration to me is reset the clock. Start over with options in front of you. Don't just sit and stare at your navel and say, "Boy, I screwed up. I wasted my whole life. Woe is me." Maybe you wasted this many years. You don't know how long you've got. Today is a new day. Tomorrow is a new day.
Right.
Which way do you want to go, today and tomorrow?
And my 12-step programming, I'm going to say
Yeah,
programming.
Go for it. You won't hear a disagreement from me.
Yeah, I know. That's why I said it. It tells me, informs me that for restoration, there have to be amends. So if I'm talking about,
Well, that's part of the propaganda.
yeah. Well, okay, but if I'm talking about for self-forgiveness, what do we do to make amends for ourselves? And if you don't like that word, what would be a different
Okay,
way of-
so when I was a child, this whole make amends thing. When I was a child, I used to steal things that weren't nailed down. And I knew it was wrong. I did it because I was smart enough to get away with it, and I did it because I wanted stuff I didn't have. And I would steal things. And my brother and I would regularly go on Sunday to church. My parents always sent us, they didn't take us. And we walked to church.
on the bus?
No, we walked 2 blocks,
Yeah.
3 blocks to Methodist church. And people in the church learned pretty quickly what we were about and made us sit on the front row where the preacher could watch us the whole time. But there was a drugstore on the
Harder
way.
to take money out the till that way.
Yeah, well, I actually got quite skilled at that. But there was a drugstore on the way, and my brother and I would go in, and my brother would engage the clerk, and how much is this, and do you have any of that behind the counter? And I'd be stealing candy bars off the rack in front, put them down my pants. So we got away with it. We never got caught. We got away with it. Life went on. We graduated from high school and went off to the world. I hit the point in my life where I was feeling some real remorse. So I sat down and tried to calculate how many Sundays, how many candy bars, how much money, and I accumulated that amount of money, and I put it in an envelope, and I wrote a letter. I didn't sign the letter, didn't want the guy to know who it was. I just was dealing with my sense of guilt or shame or remorse. And then went to the drugstore and put it in the slot in the door. Intellectually, I know that whoever opened the store that day, which probably wasn't him,
Right.
took that money
And
and put it in their
put it in
pocket,
their pocket.
threw the letter away.
Right.
That's not on me.
Right.
I made my reparations
Right.
To my satisfaction. Now, a 12-step program say, no, you didn't make good faith amends. You're still working step 4. You got to go back and see that guy and say, hey, it was me and I did this. I understand that, but I wasn't willing to do that. But I still felt relief from the guilt that I was carrying.
Okay, and so then
I did something in a positive way to assuage it.
And so for those who don't know, step 4 in a 12-step program is a fearless and searching moral inventory. One of the things that I would say about a 12-step program is those individuals are not trained therapists. Not everything that they say is 100% grounded in good therapy practice.
Right.
Okay. But what I would argue is that the amend is to absolve the individual of guilt, not necessarily to make the other person forgive them, because that if that's your goal, that's
Not
not
always
what
possible.
Yeah, that's not always what an amend is. And
I
so
went out of business. My wife died of cancer because I didn't have enough money to pay for the insurance, and it's all because you stole candy.
Yeah.
You son of a gun.
well, and so if your recompense, if that was enough for you
Yeah.
to let go
Oh, I feel much
of
better.
the guilt and the remorse, then I would argue that's what the goal
It's
is.
supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I heard people from 12-step programs refer to therapists as the rapist, THERAPIST, therapist. Do you subscribe to that?
No, and what I tell people all the time is those people are not qualified therapists, and there is every reason to go to a 12-step program, but you should also be in psychotherapy if you want to be. If you don't, then, and that's not for you, then I'm not saying that it is a requirement, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
And people who say that, I was in a 12-step meeting once, and a guy who had just been on the wagon, off the wagon, and was a young kid. I mean, like in his mid-20s, and he came in one day and said, "Wow, I can't believe it. I went to a
Had an
psychiatrist,
epiphany, yeah.
and he gave me some
Drugs.
medicine, and I'm not depressed anymore." And there was a guy there who was 40 years sober and just lost it on this guy and said, "That's a drug, and that's a mood altering substance, and that's no different than smoking dope or drinking alcohol, and you can't." And I said to the kid afterwards, I don't agree with that. I think that if, going to the psychiatrist has given you a new lease on life, it's okay for you to believe in that. And so that's, sometimes 12-step programs work at cross purposes to what we would consider mainstream psychiatry or psychology.
Well,
and
there's a lot of studies that show 12-step groups, if everybody gets better in a 12-step group, they'll have a couple meetings at that level, and then somebody will fall off the wagon.
Yeah.
So that they can circle
so they
the
can go
wagons.
back, back
Still
to
have
ground
a way to
zero.
connect, yeah.
because they don't know where to go after that. Right.
Right.
And so restoration is whatever the individual needs
To do.
to let
Put
go
the burden down.
of the guilt, but also the shame. And the shame is always harder than the guilt.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're going to be, as a therapist, really frustrated because you'll be able to have an epiphany and they'll let go of the guilt, but they won't let go of the shame.
My wife occasionally laughs at me because I will tell people I don't do guilt. Mm-hmm. I do remorse. Mm-hmm. I think there's a significant distinction in those
Okay,
words.
talk about it.
Remorse comes from a sense of personal integrity. Mm-hmm. To be the person I want to be. All within myself, not an externalized script that somebody puts on me. For me to look in the mirror and say, you're who you need to be, want to be. If I make a bad choice, if I'm human and I get temperamental, if I have a road rage incident, or if I regress and steal a candy bar or whatever, that's not a whole definition of me, but it's something that I've done about which I am not pleased or proud. So remorse is when I can articulate that. I feel really badly that I did this or that I didn't do this.
So there's no guilt and
No,
remorse.
no guilt and no shame.
I was just going to say, but you know what else there isn't? There isn't any shame.
Right.
And that, to me, that's the kicker, is when you can get people to accept the guilt message.
Yeah.
It's harder to get them to accept the shame message. But when the shame has been let go of,
Yeah.
has been absolved, that's what renewal is. That's when you really can start to think about integrity. Am I living my life in accordance with the values and the characteristics that I believe I want to live my life with? And that's a powerful place to be.
Yeah. And if you surround yourself with healthy people, they'll reinforce that
Yeah.
script.
Yeah.
If you surround yourself with unhealthy people, they will attack that script
Right.
and reinforce the previous script. Your fault, you're bad, you fail.
And so we're almost out of time, but now you've brought up something that I think is really relevant, because it goes back to the 12-step program. So the 12-step program says you got to change your playmates and your playpens.
Yeah.
And so if I'm in a toxic relationship in a 12-step program that's going to continue to undermine my recovery, they say, oh, you got to get out of
ditch
that.
it.
Yeah.
Right.
So do you think that if I've gotten to renewal, I've given up guilt, I've given up shame, I'm restored, but you have that person that, because they haven't done the work, they're still giving you some undermining messages. Can you live in that relationship? Can a therapist help a person live in that relationship healthily? Or is it just always going to be undermining? And
I don't see a way that you can help them live there healthily, but I'm not sure that it's your responsibility to get them out of there.
yeah, no, I think
So
that's an
I
excellent
don't
point.
want you preaching them out,
Right.
but I want you repeating to the message. You have responsibility.
Yeah.
You can choose to
Right.
go to the family reunion knowing that Uncle Billy's going to be there and he's going to be drunk and that's going to get in your face.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to go, and you have to find a way to go with no harm, no foul. Let it go. Come
Mm-hmm.
back. Say, well, that went about like I expected. But don't let it contaminate you and bring
Right.
home with you a bunch of crap.
And so,
Or you can choose not to go and deal with whatever the bullshit is that people throw at you for that.
and what is that?
Freedom.
Good boundary setting.
Ah, yeah.
And so when you are renewed,
Yeah.
you now have the ability to choose good boundaries. You don't have to leave that relationship.
Right.
You just set the
You have
boundaries
to redefine it.
that are good for you. And if that person doesn't like it, they'll leave
Yeah. And blame you.
and blame you,
Yeah. Which is okay.
which is okay.
Yep. But that's part of what you have to make clear to the client.
Right.
This is the road forward.
Right.
This will happen. You can choose it or not.
But I think that it is really easy for therapists to say, "Oh, you can't live with that person now.
Yeah.
They're going to undermine you."
Yeah.
And I think I'm like you. I don't have to say that. All I have to say is, if
Not
you
gonna
set
say
good
that.
boundaries, the relationship will either change
Yeah.
or that person will leave.
Yeah.
But you don't have to leave.
Right.
So if you want to do the show a favor, what you can do is find us on the interwebs at Psych with Mike on YouTube and subscribe to the show. And I really, really, really want people to do that, because that is super beneficial for us. You can look for us on the Apple Podcasts and leave us a review and a rating, and that helps other people find the show. And we really appreciate that. Brett just dropped his computer. And the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. And if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.